the change by attraction, because you don't have to push, prod, persuade, or punish people to create change in your organization. I'm your host, Esther Derby. I want you to listen to some words and then notice the image that comes into your mind. It might help to close your eyes if you can do that safely. Don't close your eyes if it's not safe. Okay, now listen and make a mental note of the image that comes into your mind. Driving change. Installing change. Evangelizing change. Rolling out a change. These are phrases that I hear people use very often when they're talking about organizational change. They feel familiar, partly because we've heard them so often, but the images are familiar too. And when you hear these words, they bring up these images, associations, and analogies in our minds. It's because they're metaphors, and that's part of what metaphors do, but they do more. They shape our thoughts, and therefore the possibilities for understanding, for problem solving, and for action. So they open up certain possibilities, but they also close the door on others. The metaphors that people use in an organization when they talk about change bound their thinking, for good or for ill, mostly without conscious attention, because much of our thought is unconscious. We're running on autopilot, fueled by metaphor. And when we use language like this to describe change, we're shaping people's expectations, we're bounding what possibilities they see and account for, and we're masking the complexity of organizational change. So when I'm working with an organization, I listen to how people use metaphors. Not every metaphor necessarily, because they're ubiquitous. You've probably heard me use a few of them already. But I listen carefully when people use them talking about change, if I'm there to help them with change. When you notice how people talk about change, some patterns may become visible. And when you shift metaphors or use plain descriptive language, you can shift the pattern. So let's look at metaphors a little more closely. Metaphors affect what people expect, what they plan for, what they ignore, what's surprising, what comes out of the blue for them. We often think about metaphor as flowery language or poetic language. Metaphors ask us or invite us to experience one thing as another, and they evoke frames, which are cognitive structures we use to think. So, what's a frame? A frame is a little scenario in a way. It has objects, it has roles, a cast of characters. There are relationships between the roles. They may include what people do with objects. And within a certain frame, certain scenes play out that make sense within that frame. When people accept a metaphor and the frame that goes with it, they tend to ignore both data and experience that contradicts it. So let's look at an example of a metaphor I hear a lot. Installing change. It could be installing Agile, could be installing any methodology or process or a desired set of behaviors. Let's look at how that metaphor works. So the frame is placing or replacing a part in a machine or a device. The main character is the installer. That's the animate character. There are objects, the parts, the thing that the part will be installed into. But it's interesting to note that the inanimate part that's being installed into doesn't have agency. It's an inert recipient of whatever change is being installed. The part is a discrete unit that will fit neatly into the device or machine. You can be replacing something broken or putting in a new part that will do something different. And placing it results in an immediate difference in function. Either a return to what it did before or some new way of functioning. Only the installer can take conscious action or have thoughts or emotions. Machines aren't capable of independent thought or action. So how does this play out? How does this frame play out? Well, there's some expectations. One of them is plug and play. You plug it in and it starts to play. The installation will work smoothly, and the new part will either cause a resumption of a previous function or a new function. Like I can install a new motor in my ceiling fan if the old one's broken, and then it will work again. Or I can install a light kit, and now it functions as both a fan and a light. All I have to do is install it. The change will be immediate. There's no learning curve, there's no stumbling, or grumbling for that matter. There's no time, education, or coaching needed to develop mastery. Objections or emotional responses break the frame, because inanimate objects wouldn't have either. So when you're working with an organization, Pay attention to the metaphors that people use. You can develop a hypothesis about how people are approaching a change effort. You can uncover assumptions and blind spots. I mentioned some typical metaphors at the start of the episode: driving change, installing change, and evangelizing change. Some others are talking about change as a journey or as transformation. Sometimes people talk about it as rebirth. I've even heard people talk about rooting out complacency. Then analyze the metaphor. How might it affect how people think about and plan for and act to bring change? What's the frame? What roles exist within the frame? Are there objects? What actions make sense between the roles? How do they relate to the objects? What can those characters do or not do? What might the metaphor lead people to expect or not expect? Then check out your hunches. What are people actually doing? How does the metaphor show up in their expectations, decisions, or treatment of those who are expected to change? Then you can try exploring a different metaphor. Just consciously try it on. You could pick one from the list, or you could pick one that you feel fits more closely, and then think about what is that frame? Who are the actors? What are their roles? What actions are expected? What breaks the frame? What unexpected actions just don't fit in there? What happens when people break the frame? And then notice what differences you see between the metaphor that's currently in use and the alternative that you might try out. I often talk about what's actually involved in the change rather than relying on a metaphor. So I'll use plain descriptive language to talk about some of the activities that have to happen, some of the shifts that have to come about in order for people to actually accomplish the desired outcome. So I might talk about learning skills. I might talk about education. I might talk about experimenting, retiring old technologies, fixing problems, examining assumptions, reviewing legacy structures and policies, designing structures and policies, updating mental models, finding a better way to work. Just words that are a more accurate description of what actually goes into having a different outcome, having different actions and interactions and ways of working become prevalent in the organization. We're swimming in metaphor. Which is a metaphor? Metaphors can help us understand. They're essential to our cognitive processes, but they can also obscure things. They shape our thoughts and therefore the possibilities we see for problem solving and action. They open one door and close another. The idea isn't to eliminate metaphor. They're deeply embedded in the way we process language and in the way we think. Just pay attention. Once you're aware, you can observe effects. You can see how people approach a change. You can look at their expectations, see what actions they take, what decisions they make, how they react to situations that might be outside the frame. Look at their plans. Look at how they're solving problems in light of the metaphor that they're using. And then see if you can insert a different metaphor that's a closer fit for what you're trying to accomplish. Or try using just descriptive language that accurately describe what's involved in accomplishing the desired outcome. You may increase the chance that the change will accomplish what they set out to do. Thanks for listening. You'll find references and links mentioned in the episode at changebyattraction.simplecast.com. Check out my website and blog at www.estherderby.com. You'll find lots of articles about change, and you can sign up for my newsletter there. If you enjoyed the podcast, please let your friends know and rate it on Simplecast or wherever you get your podcasts.